The bullet that shattered the window of the general store in Victor, Colorado, missed Florence Dawson by 3 inches. And that was the moment she decided romance was something that happened to other women, softer women, women who had time to dream instead of survive. It was June of 1883, and Florence had been running her late father's general store for 2 years since consumption had taken him. She was 24 years old, unmarried, and according to the church ladies who whispered behind their fans, likely to stay that way. A woman who handled firearms, kept ledgers, and refused to simper was not the kind of woman men courted in polite society. Florence told herself she did not mind. She told herself this every morning while pinning up her auburn hair, every afternoon while stocking shelves, every evening while eating supper alone in the rooms above the store. The shooting had been an accident, some drunken miners settling a dispute outside, but it rattled her more than she cared to admit. She swept up the glass with steady hands, boarded the window, and went back to her inventory as if nothing had happened. This was survival. This was her life. 3 days later, a cowboy walked into her store. He was tall, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of winter sky. Dust covered his boots and his hat was worn at the edges, but he carried himself with a quiet confidence that made Florence look up from her ledger. He removed his hat when he entered, revealing dark hair that needed cutting. "Morning, madam," he said, and his voice was low and respectful. "I'm looking for work. Heard you might need someone to make deliveries, handle the heavier goods." Florence set down her pen. "Where did you hear that?" "The blacksmith mentioned it. Said you have been managing alone since your father passed. Said it might be getting to be too much for one person." She bristled at that. "I manage just fine." "I am sure you do," he said, and there was no mockery in his tone. "But the boarding house 2 doors down is looking for someone to handle their supply orders too. I figured one person could make runs for both establishments, save you the time. You could focus on the business end of things." It was practical. It made sense. Florence did not like that it made sense. "What's your name?" she asked. "Porter Easton, madam. I have been working ranches mostly, but I am looking to settle somewhere for a while. References if you want them." She studied him for a long moment. He met her gaze steadily, waiting. There was something honest in his face, something that made her want to trust him even though she had learned not to trust easily. "The pay is not much," she finally said. "I am not expecting much. And I will not tolerate drinking or gambling or any of the nonsense that passes for recreation around here." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Yes, madam. When can you start?" "Right now, if you need me to." And that was how Porter Easton came into Florence Dawson's life, with dust on his boots and patience in his eyes, though she would not understand the significance of that June morning for many months to come. He proved himself useful immediately. The heavy crates that took Florence half an hour to move, he shifted in minutes. The delivery route that consumed her entire morning, he completed before noon. He was punctual, polite, and never once made her feel as though he expected gratitude for simply doing his job. Within a week, she wondered how she had managed without him. Within 2 weeks, she stopped wondering and simply accepted his presence as part of the store's rhythm. What she did not expect was the way he noticed things. "Window still boarded up," he observed one afternoon, nodding toward the front of the store. "Glass is expensive," Florence replied, not looking up from her accounting. "I could fix it. I know a man who owes me a favor, works with glass over in Leadville, could get you a fair price." "I said it is expensive. And I said I could get you a fair price." She looked up then, ready to tell him to mind his own business, but the expression on his face stopped her. He was not pitying her. He was not trying to rescue her. He was simply offering help the way one person offers help to another. "Fine," she said, "but it comes out of the store budget, and I want a receipt for everything." The window was replaced within a week, and it cost half what she had expected. Summer deepened into July, and the mountains around Victor blazed with wildflowers. The mining town was rough but growing, full of men seeking fortunes in the gold veins that ran through the hills. Florence had learned to navigate this world carefully, to be firm but not aggressive, competent but not threatening. It was a narrow path for a woman alone. Porter seemed to understand this without being told. When drunk miners came into the store, he materialized from the stockroom, his presence enough to keep things civil. When suppliers tried to cheat her on prices, he quietly mentioned market rates from other towns, his tone conversational but his meaning clear. He never overstepped, never made decisions for her, but he was always there, a steady presence at her back. She began to rely on him, and that terrified her. One evening in late July, after they had closed the store and Porter was preparing to head back to the boarding house where he rented a room, Florence found herself saying, "There is stew left from supper." "More than I can eat." He paused in the doorway. "That is kind of you. It is practical. Food should not go to waste." "No, madam, it should not." They ate at the small table in her kitchen, the window open to catch the evening breeze. At first, the silence was awkward, but then Porter asked about her father, about how he had started the store, and Florence found herself talking more than she had in months. She told him about arriving in Victor when she was 16, about her father's dream of building something lasting, about the way consumption had wasted him slowly until there was nothing left but memory and responsibility. Porter listened without interruption, and when she finished, he simply said, "He would be proud of what you have built." "I have not built anything. I have just kept it going." "That is building," Porter said. "Keeping something alive when everything wants to tear it down. That is the hardest kind of building there is." No one had ever said anything like that to her before. Florence felt something crack open in her chest, some wall she had built brick by careful brick. She looked down at her bowl, afraid of what her face might reveal. After that, supper became a routine. Not every night, but often enough that Florence stopped pretending it was about food waste, and Porter stopped pretending he believed her excuses. They talked about everything and nothing. About the mountains, about the changing seasons, about the future of Victor, and whether the gold would last. Porter told her about growing up on a ranch in Wyoming, about losing his parents to fever when he was 19, about the years of drifting that had followed. "Why did you stop drifting?" Florence asked one evening. Porter was quiet for a long moment. "I got tired," he finally said. "Tired of moving, tired of not mattering anywhere. I wanted to find a place where I could put down roots, be part of something." "And you think Victor is that place?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. "I think it might be." August arrived with thunderstorms that rolled across the mountains every afternoon, dramatic and violent and brief. Florence loved the storms, the way they cleared the air and left everything smelling of pine and rain. One afternoon, a storm caught her and Porter as they were unloading a shipment behind the store. They rushed to get the crates inside, but by the time they finished, they were both soaked through. Florence was laughing, actually laughing, as she pushed wet hair out of her face. When had she last laughed like that? Porter was grinning too, water dripping from his hat brim, and for a moment they just stood there in the stockroom, dripping and ridiculous and somehow perfectly happy. "You should get into dry clothes," Porter said, and his voice was rough. "So should you." But neither of them moved. The moment stretched out, fragile as spun glass. Florence was suddenly, acutely aware of how close they were standing, of the way Porter's eyes had darkened, of the fact that her heart was beating too fast and it had nothing to do with running through the rain. Then Porter stepped back, breaking the spell. "I will come back tomorrow to finish organizing these crates. You are soaking wet. You will catch cold walking back to the boarding house." "I will be fine, madam. Florence," she heard herself say. "My name is Florence." He smiled then, soft and genuine. "Florence," he repeated, like he was tasting the word. "I will see you tomorrow, Florence." After he left, Florence stood in the stockroom for a long time, listening to the rain and trying to understand what was happening to her. She had decided 2 years ago that romance was for other women. She had accepted that her life would be the store and the ledgers and the slow accumulation of lonely days. She had made peace with it, but Porter was unmaking that peace, gently and inexorably, and she did not know how to stop him. Worse, she was not sure she wanted to. The summer wore on. Florence found herself watching for Porter in the mornings, found her mood lifting when he walked through the door. She noticed small things about him. The way he always greeted her with the same quiet respect, the careful way he handled merchandise, the patience he showed with difficult customers. She noticed the way children liked him, how he always had a piece of candy or a kind word for them. She noticed that he never looked at other women the way he sometimes looked at her, those brief, unguarded moments when she would catch him watching her with something like wonder in his eyes. And she noticed the sunsets. Victor's sunsets were spectacular, the mountains catching fire with gold and crimson and purple, but she had stopped really seeing them years ago. Porter paid attention. He would pause in his work sometimes just to watch the light change. One evening, as they stood outside the store locking up, he said, "Look at that sky." Florence looked. The clouds were painted impossible shades of orange and rose, the mountains dark silhouettes against the blazing horizon. "Beautiful," she murmured. "Makes me think of your hair," Porter said quietly. "The way the light catches it sometimes." Florence turned to stare at him, but he was still watching the sunset, his expression peaceful. He said it so simply, as if comparing her to sunsets was the most natural thing in the world. She did not know how to respond, so she said nothing. But later that night she stood at her bedroom window and watched the last light fade and felt something warm and terrifying unfurl in her chest. After that, she started noticing that Porter always found reasons to call her outside at sunset. A question about a delivery route, a request for her opinion on where to store something, any excuse to have her standing beside him as the mountains burned with color. He never said anything inappropriate, never pushed, but she began to understand that this was his courtship, these quiet moments of shared beauty, these offerings of wonder. It was the gentlest siege Florence had ever experienced. September brought cooler nights and the first whisper of autumn in the aspen groves. The mining town's population swelled as men tried to make their fortunes before winter closed the high passes. Business was good, which meant longer hours and more work. Porter handled it all without complaint, and Florence found herself increasingly grateful for his steady presence. One afternoon, a man came into the store who made Florence's skin crawl. He was well-dressed, which marked him as someone with money, probably a mine owner or investor. He looked around the store with an appraising eye that lingered too long on Florence herself. "You are the owner?" he asked. "I am. How can I help you?" "I am Theodore Crane. I have been buying up properties in Victor, preparing for the town's expansion. This building occupies a prime location. I would like to make you an offer." "The store is not for sale." Crane smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "You have not heard my offer yet. I assure you it is more than generous, certainly more than a woman alone could hope to make from running a general store." Florence felt her spine stiffen. I said it is not for sale. Miss Dawson, be reasonable. A woman of your obvious intelligence must see that Victor is changing. The days of small family operations are ending. This town needs modern establishments, larger operations. What could you possibly hope to accomplish here? I could hope to continue the business my father built. Your father is dead, Crane said bluntly, and sentiment is a poor basis for business decisions. I am offering you a chance to sell now, before circumstances force you to accept less favorable terms. There was a threat in those words, veiled but clear. Florence opened her mouth to tell Crane exactly where he could put his offer, but Porter appeared from the stockroom. The lady said no, he said quietly. Crane turned, irritation flashing across his face. This is a private business discussion. And the business is concluded, Porter said. He was not aggressive, but there was something implacable in his stance, something that suggested he would not be easily moved. Store is about to close anyway. You should be on your way. For a moment, Crane looked like he might argue, but something in Porter's eyes made him reconsider. He turned back to Florence with a cold smile. Think about my offer, Miss Dawson. Victor is going to grow whether you participate in that growth or not. It would be wiser to profit from it. After he left, Florence released a breath she had not realized she was holding. Thank you. Who was he? Porter asked. She told him what she knew of Theodore Crane, about his reputation for buying properties and squeezing out smaller competitors. Porter listened with a deepening frown. He will be back, Porter said. I know. And he might not be so polite next time. I know that too. Porter was quiet for a moment, then said, You should not have to deal with men like that alone. I have been dealing with difficult men my entire life. That does not mean you should have to keep doing it. Florence looked at him, at the concern in his face, and felt that warm, terrifying feeling intensify. What are you suggesting? I am suggesting that maybe you do not have to be alone anymore, if you do not want to be. The air between them seemed to thicken. Florence's heart was hammering now, and she could not blame it on anger or fear. Porter, I know I am just a hired hand, he said quickly. I know I do not have much to offer, but I care about you, Florence. I care about what happens to you. And I think, if I am reading things right, you might care about me too. She should deny it. She should protect herself, maintain the walls she had built so carefully. But she was tired of walls. She was tired of being alone. And Porter Easton had spent 3 months proving himself to be the most decent man she had ever known. I do, she whispered, care about you, but I do not know how to do this. I do not know how to be the kind of woman men court. Porter stepped closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his blue eyes. You do not have to be any kind of woman except yourself. That is all I want. That is all I have ever wanted. I am not soft, Florence said, and hated that her voice shook. I am not gentle or biddable or any of the things women are supposed to be. You are strong, Porter said. You are brave and smart and beautiful and kind, even when you try to hide it. You are everything, Florence. How can you not see that? And then he was kissing her, or she was kissing him, and it did not matter who moved first because they were finally closing the distance that had been shrinking between them all summer. His hand cupped her face with devastating gentleness, and Florence felt the last of her walls crumble into dust. When they finally broke apart, she was shaking. Porter rested his forehead against hers, both of them breathing hard. I have been wanting to do that since the first day I walked into this store, he said roughly. You have been thinking about kissing me since June. I have been thinking about everything with you since June. Kissing you, talking to you, building a life with you, all of it. Florence pulled back enough to meet his eyes. That is fast. Is it? Because it feels like I have been waiting my whole life to find you. It should have sounded like a line, like empty flattery, but the way he said it, the raw honesty in his voice made it real, made it true. "I am afraid," Florence admitted. "I do not know how to do this without losing myself." "Then we will figure it out together," Porter said. "I do not want you to lose yourself, Florence. I want you to have room to be everything you are. I just want to be there beside you while you do it." She kissed him again then, pouring into it all the loneliness and longing she had been carrying for so long. Porter gathered her close, and for the first time in years, Florence felt like she was exactly where she belonged. They courted properly after that, or as properly as two people who worked together every day could manage. Porter still made his deliveries and handled the heavy work, but now there were stolen kisses in the stockroom, hands brushing as they passed each other, smiles that held entire conversations. The church ladies noticed, of course, and the gossip spread through Victor like wildfire. The general store's spinster owner was being courted by her hired hand. The scandal was delicious. Florence discovered she did not care. Let them talk. Porter made her happy in a way she had never imagined possible. He made her laugh. He made her feel seen. And every evening, he still found reasons to bring her outside to watch the sunset, still looked at her like she was more beautiful than mountains on fire. October arrived with frost on the windows and aspens turning gold. Theodore Crane returned to the store twice more, each time increasing his offer, each time making it clearer that he was not going to give up easily. Florence refused him both times, and Porter made sure Crane understood that further visits would not be welcome. "He is going to cause trouble," Porter said after the third visit. "Probably," Florence agreed, "but the store is not for sale at any price. My father built this. It is all I have left of him." "It is not all you have," Porter said gently. "You have his strength, his vision, the way he saw the world. Those things are in you, Florence. They have always been in you. The store is just a building. It is his legacy." "No," Porter said. "You are his legacy. And whatever we build together, that will be his legacy too." The idea of building something together, of a future that was theirs rather than just hers alone, still felt fragile and new. But Florence was beginning to believe in it, beginning to trust that Porter meant every word he said. In late October, Porter asked her to go riding with him on a Sunday afternoon. Florence could not remember the last time she had taken a full day away from the store, but she found herself agreeing. They rode up into the mountains, following trails that wound through pine forests and across meadows already brown with approaching winter. The air was crisp and clean, and the sky was impossibly blue. Porter brought them to a high ridge that overlooked the entire valley. Victor lay below them, small and remote, smoke rising from 100 chimneys. The mountains stretched away in every direction, peak after snow-capped peak fading into purple distance. "I come up here sometimes," Porter said as they dismounted, "when I need to think." "It is beautiful," Florence said. "Everything is beautiful with you," Porter replied, and then, before she could process that, he dropped to one knee. Florence's heart stopped. "I know it has only been a few months," Porter said. "I know people will say it is too fast, that we should wait. But I have never been more sure of anything in my life than I am of this, of you, of us." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a single small stone. "It is not much. But I promise you, Florence Dawson, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret saying yes. I will work beside you, support your dreams, and love you with everything I am. Will you marry me?" Florence looked at him, this good man who had walked into her store on a June morning and quietly, patiently, loved her into believing in romance again. She thought about the sunsets he had shared with her, the way he said her name like a prayer, the future that suddenly seemed bright and possible instead of just endless and alone. "Yes," she said, and was surprised to find tears on her cheeks. "Yes, Porter, I will marry you." He stood and kissed her there on the ridge with the whole world spread out below them, and Florence understood that this was what she had been afraid of, not losing herself, but finding that she could be more than she had imagined. That love did not diminish her but expanded her, opening up new possibilities, new ways of being. They were married in November in a small ceremony at the church in Victor. Florence wore a simple dress of deep blue, and Porter wore his best suit. The church ladies attended, gossip temporarily set aside in favor of witnessing what they considered a minor miracle. The spinster shopkeeper had found love after all. Porter's friends from various ranches came, and several of Florence's regular customers, and the blacksmith who had first told Porter about the store opening, looking pleased with himself for the matchmaking. The Reverend spoke about partnership and commitment and building a life together, and Florence felt the truth of it settle into her bones. This was real. This was happening. She was choosing this, choosing Porter, choosing a future that included someone else's dreams alongside her own. When Porter slipped the ring onto her finger, his hand was steady even though she could see emotion shining in his eyes. When she repeated her vows, her voice was clear and certain. And when the Reverend pronounced them married and Porter kissed her, gentle and sweet and full of promise, Florence felt something shift fundamentally inside her. She was no longer alone. And instead of feeling trapped by that, she felt free. They held a small reception at the boarding house, the owner having offered her dining room for the occasion. There was cake and coffee and dancing to music from a fiddle and guitar. Porter danced with Florence, holding her close, and whispered, "Are you happy?" "I did not know I could be this happy," Florence admitted. "Good," Porter said, "because I plan to make you even happier, every single day for the rest of our lives." It was an impossible promise, Florence knew. Life was hard, especially in a place like Victor. There would be difficulties and setbacks and probably heartbreak along the way. But looking into Porter's eyes, she believed that he would try. That he would wake up every morning and choose her, choose them, choose to make their life together as good as he possibly could. And she would do the same for him. They had decided to live in the rooms above the store, at least for now. The space was small but sufficient, and it meant Florence could still manage the business she had worked so hard to maintain. Porter had assured her he had no intention of her giving up the store, that he understood how much it meant to her. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, and occasionally awkward in the way of two people learning each other for the first time. But there was laughter too, and gentleness, and a growing certainty that they had chosen well. Afterward, Florence lay in Porter's arms and felt the strangeness of not being alone in her bed in her life. It was an adjustment, but not an unwelcome one. "Tell me something true," Porter said into the darkness. Florence thought for a moment. "I used to believe romance was something that happened to other women, softer women, women who were not trying so hard just to survive. And now I think maybe I was wrong. Maybe romance is not about being soft. Maybe it is about being brave enough to let someone in." Porter tightened his arms around her. "You are the bravest person I know." "I am terrified," Florence admitted. "That is how you know it matters," Porter said. "The things worth having are always a little terrifying." December brought snow to the mountains, deep and transforming. Victor became a world of white and gray, smoke and ice. The store stayed busy with people stocking up for winter, and Porter proved invaluable in making sure supplies kept flowing even as the weather worsened. Florence watched him work and felt a surge of gratitude and affection so intense it almost hurt. How had she gotten so lucky? Christmas came, and they exchanged small gifts. Florence gave Porter a new hat to replace his battered old one, and a fine pair of leather gloves. Porter gave her a shawl of soft wool dyed a deep burgundy that brought out the red in her hair, and a journal bound in tooled leather. "For your thoughts," he said. "You have so many of them. Seems like they should be written down." No one had ever given her a gift that acknowledged her inner life before. Florence held the journal and felt tears threaten. "Thank you. Thank you for marrying me," Porter said. "Thank you for taking a chance on a drifter who walked into your store looking for work." "You are not a drifter anymore." "No," Porter agreed. "I am home." The new year arrived, 1884, dawning cold and bright. Florence had never been one for resolutions, but she found herself thinking about the future more than usual. The store was doing well, but Theodore Crane's threat still lingered in the back of her mind. Victor was changing, growing, and she was not sure what that meant for small operations like hers. She mentioned her worries to Porter one evening as they ate supper. He listened thoughtfully, then said, "What if we expanded?" The boarding house owner mentioned she might be willing to sell. "What if we bought it, turned it into a hotel? We could run the store and the hotel both, make ourselves too established for someone like Crane to easily push out." Florence considered it. It was ambitious, maybe too ambitious. But it was also smart. Diversifying would give them stability, more income, more presence in the community. "That would take capital we do not have," she said. "We could get a loan. With both our incomes and the store's reputation, the bank might be willing to work with us." "It is a risk." "Everything worth doing is a risk," Porter said, echoing his words from their wedding night. "But I believe in us, Florence. I believe we can build something real here." She looked at her husband, at the faith and determination in his face, and made a decision. "All right, let us try." The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. They approached the bank and, after some negotiation, secured a loan to purchase the boarding house. The owner was ready to retire and sold to them at a fair price, relieved to have buyers who would maintain the establishment's good name. Porter threw himself into renovations, updating rooms and making repairs that had been long neglected. Florence managed the store and handled the business side of the hotel acquisition, drawing up contracts and projections with the same careful attention to detail her father had taught her. By spring, they were ready to reopen as the Easton Hotel and General Store, a combined operation that quickly became one of Victor's most successful businesses. Florence hired staff to help manage both establishments and discovered she had a talent for expansion that matched her talent for survival. Porter worked tirelessly, moving between properties, fixing problems, charming guests with his quiet competence. And every evening, no matter how busy they were, Porter still found time to watch the sunset with Florence. Sometimes they stood outside the store, sometimes on the hotel's porch, sometimes just looking out a window. But always together, always sharing that moment of beauty. "You know," Florence said one evening in May as they watched the sky flame gold and crimson, "when we first married, someone told me you were courting me with sunsets." Porter looked surprised. "Who told you that?" "The hotel cook. She is quite the romantic." "She is not wrong," Porter admitted. "I always thought if I could just get you to stop long enough to see how beautiful the world could be, you might let yourself believe you deserved beautiful things." Florence leaned against his shoulder. "I believed romance was for other women." "I know you did. That is why I had to be patient. Had to wait for you to see what I saw." "And what did you see?" "A woman strong enough to survive anything but brave enough to still hope for more. A woman who deserved every sunset and every sunrise and every beautiful moment I could possibly give her." Florence felt her throat tighten with emotion. "How did you know that I wanted more?" "Because everyone wants more," Porter said simply. "Everyone wants to be seen and loved and chosen. You just thought you were not allowed to want it. I just had to convince you that you were wrong." "You wrote my name in every sunset," Florence said softly, understanding it fully now. "Every time you called me out to watch the light change, every time you compared me to the mountains, you were writing me into something beautiful, making me part of the wonder instead of just an observer." Porter turned to face her, cupping her cheek with one calloused hand. "You were always part of the wonder, Florence. You just needed someone to point it out." She kissed him there on the porch with the sunset blazing behind them and felt the absolute rightness of this life they were building together. Summer came, and with it, Theodore Crane. He had clearly heard about their expansion and appeared at the hotel one afternoon, his expression sour. "Congratulations on your recent success," he said to Florence, though his tone suggested he meant anything but, "Thank you," Florence replied coolly. "Was there something you needed?" "I wanted to extend a revised offer for your properties, both the store and the hotel. Given your expanded operation, I am prepared to increase my price substantially." "Still not interested?" Crane's jaw tightened. "You are making a mistake, Mrs. Easton. Victor cannot sustain this many small operations. Eventually, efficiency will demand consolidation." "Then we will be efficient enough to survive," Florence said. "Now if you will excuse me, I have work to do." She turned to walk away, but Crane caught her arm. "You should listen when people try to help you." Porter appeared as if from nowhere, his hand closing around Crane's wrist. "Let go of my wife." There was no threat in Porter's voice, no anger, just absolute certainty. Crane released Florence and stepped back, but his eyes were hard. "This is not over," he said. "Yes, it is," Porter replied. "We have made our position clear multiple times now. If you continue to harass us, we will be forced to involve the law. I believe Sheriff Morrison would be very interested to hear about your persistent, unwanted attention." Crane glared at them both, then turned and left without another word. Florence released a shaky breath. "He is not going to give up," she said. "Then we will deal with him every time he appears," Porter said firmly. "Together." And they did. Over the following months, Crane made several more attempts to pressure them into selling, including spreading rumors about the hotel's quality and attempting to poach their staff with better wages. Each time, Florence and Porter met the challenge together, their partnership proving stronger than any individual assault Crane could mount. The community, watching this battle, increasingly sided with the Eastons. They were one of them, local business owners who had earned their place, while Crane was an outsider trying to buy his way to dominance. By autumn, Crane seemed to have given up. His attention turned elsewhere, to easier targets, and Florence allowed herself to relax slightly. They had survived. More than that, they had thrived. October brought news that made Florence's heart skip. She was pregnant. She told Porter in the evening as they stood watching another spectacular sunset, the mountains dressed in autumn glory. "I am going to have a baby," she said, and watched his face transform with joy. "Truly, truly." He swept her into his arms, laughing and spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing too. When he set her down, there were tears on his cheeks. "We are going to be parents," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a family. Are you happy?" "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Porter said. He knelt and pressed a kiss to her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. Your mother and I cannot wait to meet you." Florence threaded her fingers through his hair, overwhelmed with love for this man who had rewritten her entire understanding of what life could be. She had thought she was done, that survival was all she had left. But Porter had shown her that life could be more than just endurance. It could be joy. It could be partnership. It could be this fierce, bright love that illuminated everything like sunlight breaking through clouds. The pregnancy was not easy. Florence was sick in the mornings and exhausted by evenings, and there were moments when she wondered how she was going to manage both a business and a baby. But Porter was tireless in his support, taking on extra work so she could rest, bringing her ginger tea and crackers, rubbing her feet when they ached. He never complained, never suggested she should step back from the businesses she had worked so hard to build. He simply adjusted, compensated, supported. "You do not have to do all this," Florence said one evening as he massaged her swollen ankles. "I know I do not have to, I want to. But it is so much work." "So are you worth it?" Porter said simply, and that was the end of that discussion. Winter came early that year, snow falling in November and not stopping. Florence grew large with child while the world outside turned white and quiet. The hotel did steady business with travelers stranded by weather, and the store remained busy with people stocking up on supplies. Florence worked as long as she could, finally stopping only when she was so large she could barely navigate the stairs. The baby came in February during a blizzard, as if determined to make an entrance as dramatic as possible. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Florence thought she might not survive it. But Porter stayed with her the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, telling her she was strong enough to do this. And finally, after what felt like days, their son was born. Porter cried when the midwife placed the baby in his arms, tears streaming down his face as he looked at this tiny new life they had created. "He is perfect," he whispered. They named him Patrick, after Porter's father. He had Porter's blue eyes and Florence's determined chin, and from the moment he entered the world, he made his opinions known. Florence, exhausted and overwhelmed and more in love than she had thought possible, held her son and her husband and felt the fierce completeness of her life. "Thank you," Porter said as they sat together in the quiet aftermath, the baby sleeping between them. "For what? For taking a chance on me, for building this life with me, for giving me a family." "I think we gave each other a family," Florence said softly. Patrick grew, as babies do, transforming from a red-faced newborn into a chubby infant with an infectious laugh. Florence discovered she could balance motherhood and business, though it required careful organization and a willingness to ask for help, something that still did not come easily to her. Porter was a devoted father, endlessly patient with his son, and Florence often found them together, Porter talking to Patrick about everything and nothing while the baby listened with serious eyes. The businesses continued to thrive. Word spread about the quality of the Easton Hotel, about the fair prices at the general store, and people went out of their way to patronize them. Florence hired more staff, delegating tasks that did not require her direct attention, and discovered that letting go of some control actually allowed the operations to function more smoothly. Porter, meanwhile, had become something of a fixture in Victor's community, known for his honesty and work ethic. People trusted him, relied on him, and he never let them down. One evening when Patrick was 6 months old, Florence found Porter standing at their bedroom window, watching the sunset with their son in his arms. "Look at that, Patrick," Porter was saying softly. "See all those colors. That is what your mother is like. Beautiful and fierce and absolutely breathtaking." Florence stood in the doorway, listening, her heart so full it ached. "When you are older," Porter continued, "I am going to tell you about how I fell in love with your mother. How she did not think she deserved good things, so I had to show her every day that she did. How I wrote her name in every sunset until she finally believed me." "You wrote my name in sunsets," Florence said, stepping into the room. Porter turned, not at all embarrassed to be caught. "Every single one, still do. We'll keep doing it for the rest of our lives." Florence crossed to them, wrapping her arms around both her husband and son. "I love you. "I love you too," Porter said. "Both of you, more than all the sunsets in the world." Time moved forward in the way it does, marked by small moments and big changes. Patrick took his first steps, said his first words, grew from baby to toddler to small boy. The businesses continued to expand. They added a dining room to the hotel, then a small attached stable. Florence's organizational skills and Porter's work ethic proved to be a powerful combination. And the Easton Empire, as some locals jokingly called it, became one of Victor's most stable enterprises. Theodore Crane eventually left town, his consolidation schemes having failed to gain the traction he had hoped for. Florence heard he had moved to Denver and felt nothing but relief. That chapter of worry was closed. When Patrick was 3, Florence discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news came with less shock and more anticipation. They knew what to expect now, knew the challenges and the joys. Porter was delighted at the prospect of expanding their family. And Patrick, when told he would be a big brother, took the news with the seriousness of a small child entrusted with an important responsibility. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1888, during a warm afternoon when the wildflowers were just beginning to bloom in the high meadows. The labor was quicker this time, and when the midwife placed the baby girl in Florence's arms, she felt that same overwhelming rush of love she had experienced with Patrick. They named her Penelope, and she was perfect. Where Patrick had been a serious baby, Penelope was all smiles from the start. She had Florence's auburn hair and Porter's ability to charm everyone she met. Patrick, far from being jealous, appointed himself her protector, watching over her with the fierce dedication of a much older child. "Our family is complete," Porter said one evening as they sat together, watching their children play. Patrick was carefully showing Penelope a flower he had picked, explaining its colors with the earnestness of a 5-year-old. "Is it?" Florence asked. "Complete?" "Well," Porter amended with a grin, "or it is just getting started. Either way, I am happy." Florence was happy too, in a way she had never imagined possible back when she was 24 and convinced romance was for other women. She had built a life that included love and partnership and children and success, all the things she had told herself she did not need. Turns out she had needed them desperately. She had just needed to meet the right person to show her it was possible. The years continued to unfold, each one bringing its own challenges and triumphs. There were harsh winters and financial setbacks, illnesses and injuries, and the thousand small crises of running both a business and a household. But through it all, Florence and Porter faced everything together, their partnership deepening with time rather than fraying. Patrick grew into a thoughtful boy who loved books and had his father's way with people. Penelope became a whirlwind of energy and curiosity, always asking questions, always pushing boundaries in ways that reminded Florence of herself. They added another daughter, Margaret, when Penelope was 4, and then a final son, Thomas, 3 years after that. The house above the store, which had once seemed perfectly adequate for Florence alone, became too small for their growing family. They built a proper house on the edge of town, with room for all the children and a wide porch where they could watch the sunsets together. Florence insisted on keeping an office in town, above the store, where she could work without the chaos of children underfoot, but she always came home for supper. Always made time for her family. Porter never stopped courting her. Even after years of marriage, after 4 children, after building a small empire together, he still found ways to show her she was cherished. Fresh wildflowers on her desk, a new book he thought she would like, an afternoon stolen away from work just to ride up into the mountains like they had done that day he proposed, and always, always, the sunsets. No matter how busy they were, Porter made sure they watched the sunsets together. Sometimes it was just the two of them, standing on their porch while the children played in the yard. Sometimes it was the whole family, gathered to witness the mountains catch fire. But always, Porter would catch Florence's eye and smile, and she would know he was thinking the same thing she was, that they had built something beautiful, something lasting, something that began with a cowboy walking into a store and a woman learning to believe in romance again. When Patrick turned 18 in 1891, he announced he wanted to study business formally, to learn modern methods that could help expand the family enterprises even further. Florence and Porter were proud and supportive, scraping together the money to send him to a business college in Denver. He returned 2 years later full of ideas and energy, ready to take on more responsibility. Penelope, at 13, was already showing signs of inheriting her mother's head for business and her father's people skills. She could calculate profit margins in her head and charm customers into buying twice what they had planned. Florence watched her daughter and felt a fierce pride mixed with recognition. Here was a girl who would never doubt that romance and competence could coexist, who would never have to choose between love and ambition. Margaret was quiet and artistic, spending hours drawing the mountains and the buildings of Victor. Thomas, the youngest, was only 7 but already showing signs of his father's steady temperament. Their family was loud and chaotic and absolutely perfect. One evening in the summer of 1895, Florence stood on the porch of their house watching another spectacular sunset. Porter came to stand beside her, slipping an arm around her waist in a gesture so familiar it felt like breathing. 12 years, Florence said. We have been married 12 years. Best 12 years of my life, Porter replied. Sometimes I think about who I was before you walked into that store, how certain I was that I was done, that survival was enough. You were never just surviving, Porter said. You were always more than that. I just helped you see it. Florence turned to look at her husband. There was gray in his hair now, lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But his eyes were the same, that clear winter blue, full of love and steadiness and everything she had learned to trust. You wrote my name in every sunset, she said. I did, Porter agreed. I still do. Why? Because you are the sunset, Florence. You are the beautiful, impossible thing that makes me stop and stare and remember that life is full of wonder. You always have been. She kissed him there on the porch while the sky blazed gold and crimson behind them, while their children laughed somewhere in the house, while the town of Victor settled into evening below. She kissed him and felt the same flutter of excitement she had felt that first time, years ago in a stockroom smelling of rain. Some things never changed. Some loves never faded. The years continued their steady march. Patrick married a smart young woman from Denver and brought her back to Victor to help run the hotel, which had expanded yet again to meet the demands of the growing town. Penelope, at 18, scandalized everyone by announcing she wanted to attend business college herself, and Florence and Porter supported her completely, understanding that their daughter was forging her own path, just as Florence had once done. Margaret became a teacher, her artistic eye and gentle nature making her beloved by Victor's children. Thomas was still deciding what he wanted to do with his life, but there was no rush. He was only 16, with plenty of time to figure out his future. Florence and Porter, now in their 40s, began to think about slowing down. Not retiring exactly, but stepping back, letting the next generation take on more responsibility. They had built something that would outlast them, something solid and good. The Easton name meant something in Victor now: quality, integrity, fairness. It was the legacy Florence's father had dreamed of, expanded and transformed by her partnership with Porter. One evening in 1898, as they prepared for bed, Porter said, "Do you remember that day I asked if you were happy?" "Which day? You have asked me that a dozen times over the years, the first time, at our wedding reception." "I remember," Florence said. "I told you I did not know I could be this happy." "Are you still?" Porter asked. Happy, Florence thought about her answer, really considered it. Their life was not perfect. There had been sorrows and struggles, disappointments and fears. They had buried friends, weathered economic downturns, dealt with the endless complications of running businesses and raising children. There had been nights when Florence had cried from exhaustion or frustration, days when everything felt overwhelming. But through it all, through every challenge and triumph, Porter had been there, steady, loving, writing her name in sunsets. "I am more than happy," Florence said finally. "I am complete. I am exactly who I was meant to be, living exactly the life I was meant to live. And it is all because a cowboy walked into my store one June morning and decided I deserved to believe in romance." Porter pulled her close, and they lay together in the darkness of their bedroom, listening to the sounds of their house settling, their children sleeping in nearby rooms, their life humming around them. "Thank you," Florence whispered. "For what?" "For being patient. For seeing me when I did not see myself. For loving me until I learned how to love you back." "Loving you was never hard," Porter said. "You made it easy." She fell asleep in his arms, grateful and content and so deeply in love it felt like its own form of prayer. The 20th century arrived with optimism and change. Victor continued to grow, the gold mines still producing, the town transforming from rough mining camp to established community. The Eastons grew with it, their businesses adapting to new times while maintaining the principles that had made them successful. Fairness, quality, respect. Patrick and his wife had 2 children, making Florence and Porter grandparents. Penelope returned from business college with revolutionary ideas about marketing and expansion. Margaret married a fellow teacher and moved to Colorado Springs but visited often. Thomas, having tried his hand at various ventures, eventually settled into managing the store, discovering he had a talent for inventory and customer service that rivaled his mother's. Florence and Porter, now in their early 50s, spent more time together and less time working. They traveled occasionally, visiting Denver and once making the long journey to San Francisco just to see the ocean. But they always came back to Victor, to the mountains and the house and the life they had built. And every evening, weather permitting, they watched the sunsets together. One evening in the spring of 1903, as they sat on their porch watching the familiar light show, Florence said, "I want to tell you something." "Anything," Porter replied. "I used to think romance was a luxury, something frivolous that distracted from real work, real life. I thought women who believed in it were weak or foolish. And now I think romance is what makes real life bearable. It is the beauty we choose to see even when everything is hard. It is the love we nurture even when we are tired. It is sunsets and wildflowers and someone remembering how you like your coffee." She turned to look at Porter, this man who had spent 20 years proving his love in 1,000 small ways. "It is you writing my name in every sunset until I finally believed I deserved to be part of something beautiful." Porter took her hand, his thumb rubbing over her knuckles in a gesture worn smooth by repetition. "You were always beautiful, Florence, always deserving. I just had the good fortune to convince you of it." "The best fortune," Florence corrected, "for both of us." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose and deepening purple. Around them, their town settled into evening. Inside the house, they could hear their children and grandchildren gathered for Sunday supper. The sound of laughter, of conversation, of family. "If you could go back," Porter said quietly, "to that moment in 1883 when I walked into your store, would you change anything?" Florence considered the question seriously. She thought about all the years between then and now, all the struggles and triumphs, all the ways they had grown both separately and together. She thought about the woman she had been, so certain she was done with dreams, and the woman she had become, full and satisfied and deeply loved. "Not a single thing," she said firmly. "Every moment, good and bad, brought us here, and here is exactly where I want to be." "Even the parts where you were afraid, especially those parts," Florence said. "Being brave enough to let you love me, that was the smartest thing I ever did. Braver than running a business alone, braver than standing up to men like Theodore Crane. The bravest thing I ever did was believe I deserved you." Porter kissed her temple, gentle and reverent. "The bravest thing I ever did was keep showing up, keep offering you sunsets even when you did not think you wanted them." "I always wanted them," Florence admitted. "I was just too scared to reach for them." "Well," Porter said with a smile in his voice, "lucky for both of us, I was patient." They stayed on the porch until full dark, then went inside to join their family for supper. The table was crowded and noisy, full of competing conversations and reaching arms and the comfortable chaos of people who loved each other. Florence looked around at all these lives, all this love, all the proof of what she and Porter had built, and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. After everyone left and the house was quiet again, Florence and Porter prepared for bed with the easy routine of long marriage. As they settled under the quilts, Porter said, "One more thing." "What?" "Tomorrow's sunset is going to be beautiful. I checked with the sky." Florence laughed, the sound young and surprised. "You checked with the sky?" "I have my sources," Porter said solemnly. "And they assure me that tomorrow and the day after and every day for the rest of our lives, the sunsets are going to be spectacular. Because I am going to keep writing your name in them, Florence Easton, every single day. Even when we are old and gray, we are already old and gray," Porter pointed out, which was true. They were both past 50 now, their bodies showing the wear of hard work and long years. But Florence did not feel old, not when she was with Porter. "Even older then," she amended. "When we are ancient and can barely walk, especially then," Porter said. "I will wheel you outside if I have to, or we will just watch from the window. But I am never going to stop showing you how beautiful you are, how beautiful our life is. That is my promise, Florence. That is what I meant all those years ago when I said I would love you for the rest of my life." Florence turned to him in the darkness, found his face with her hands, and kissed him with all the love and passion and gratitude she had learned to express over their years together. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, she whispered, "I used to believe romance was for other women. Thank you for proving me wrong." "Thank you for letting me," Porter replied. They fell asleep tangled together, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something that would last long after they were gone. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, and somewhere in the darkness, tomorrow's sunset was already being prepared, another canvas for Porter Easton to write his wife's name across the sky. Years continued to pass, as they always do. Florence and Porter grew older, their hair completely gray now, their steps slower but still steady. They spent their days tending to their businesses, though more and more responsibility fell to their children and grandchildren. They spent their evenings on the porch, watching the mountains and talking about everything and nothing. The easy conversation of two people who had spent decades learning each other's rhythms. In 1910, when Florence was 51 and Porter 54, They celebrated their 27th anniversary with a quiet dinner at home, just the two of them. Their children had offered to throw a party, but Florence and Porter had declined. They did not need celebration or fanfare. They had each other, and that was more than enough. 27 years, Florence mused over dessert. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, sometimes it feels like forever. Both, Porter said. It is both. Do you ever regret it, settling down? You were a drifter before you met me. Maybe you would have been happier staying free. Porter reached across the table and took her hand. I was not free when I was drifting, Florence. I was lost. You gave me purpose, direction, home. You gave me everything that matters. How could I possibly regret that? But you gave up so much for me. Your freedom, your wandering. I did not give anything up, Porter said firmly. I traded something empty for something full, and I would make that trade 1,000 times over. Florence felt tears prick her eyes, emotional in a way that came more easily now than it had when she was younger. I love you so much. I know, Porter said gently. I have always known. Even when you were too scared to say it, even when you were convinced you did not deserve it, I knew. And I loved you enough for both of us until you were ready to love yourself too. That night, as they lay in bed, Florence said, Tell me about the sunsets again. What about them? Why you started calling me outside to watch them. The real reason. Porter was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. When I first saw you that day I walked into the store, you were bent over a ledger, all concentration and competence. And the light was coming through the window and catching in your hair, turning it all these shades of copper and gold. You were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. But you looked so alone, Florence, so determined to be strong that you had forgotten how to be anything else. He paused, his hand finding hers in the darkness. I knew right then that I wanted to be the one to remind you that strength and beauty could coexist, that surviving and thriving were not mutually exclusive. So I started bringing you outside at sunset, because that was when the light was the same as it had been that first day. I wanted you to see yourself the way I saw you, illuminated, radiant, absolutely breathtaking. Florence was crying now, silent tears sliding down her cheeks. After all these years, after everything they had been through, Porter could still make her feel seen in a way no one else ever had. Every sunset, Porter continued, his voice rough with emotion, I was writing a love letter to you, showing you that beauty and wonder were not just for other women. They were for you, Florence. They were always for you. She turned to him then, finding his mouth in the darkness, kissing him with all the love and gratitude and wonder she still felt after nearly 3 decades together. They made love slowly, tenderly, two people who knew each other's bodies as well as their own, who had learned over years how to bring each other pleasure and comfort in equal measure. Afterward, lying in the peaceful aftermath, Florence said, I see it now, in the sunsets. I see my name written in the colors, in the beauty. I see your love made visible. Good, Porter whispered. That was always the point. They lived on, through seasons and years, through the slow, steady march of time. The world changed around them. Automobiles began appearing on Victor's streets. Electricity came to town. The old rough edges of the mining camp were worn away by civilization. But some things remained constant. The mountains still caught fire at sunset. The Easton businesses still thrived. And Porter still found ways, every single day, to show Florence she was loved. When Florence turned 60 in 1919, their entire family gathered to celebrate. Children, grandchildren, even a few great-grandchildren now, all descended on the house for a party that lasted well into the evening. Florence, surrounded by all these people who existed because she had been brave enough to let Porter love her, felt the weight and wonder of her life settle over her like a blessing. Porter found her alone in the kitchen as the party wound down, washing dishes and humming to herself. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Happy birthday," he murmured. "Thank you for all of this," Florence said, gesturing vaguely at the house full of family. "For all of them." "We made them together," Porter reminded her. "We made a lot of things together." "That we did." Florence set down the dish she had been washing and turned in his arms to face him. Porter was 63 now, his face deeply lined, his hair white, but his eyes were the same clear blue they had been when he first walked into her store all those years ago. "One more sunset?" she asked. "Always one more sunset," Porter agreed. They went out to the porch where the family gradually joined them, all gathering to watch the familiar spectacle of the mountains catching light. Florence stood surrounded by the life she and Porter had built, his hand warm in hers, and watched the sky paint itself in shades of glory. "Look at that," Porter said softly, for her ears only. "Look at how beautiful your name is written across the whole sky." Florence looked and she saw it. In the gold and the crimson and the deep burning orange, in the purple shadows and the last rays of light catching the mountain peaks. She saw it all. The love, the partnership, the life they had chosen together. Her name written in wonder, in beauty, in the daily miracle of two people deciding to face the world side by side. She believed in romance now. She believed in love and partnership and the power of someone seeing you fully and choosing you anyway. She believed because Porter had spent 36 years proving it to her, sunset by sunset, day by day, moment by moment. "Thank you," Florence whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything, for all of it." "No," Porter said, pulling her close as the sun sank below the mountains and the sky began its slow fade to indigo. "Thank you, Florence Easton. Thank you for taking a chance on a drifter with nothing to offer but patience and sunsets. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for being exactly who you are." They stood together as darkness fell and the first stars appeared, surrounded by family, held by love, living proof that romance was not just for other women after all. It was for anyone brave enough to reach for it, to believe in it, to let themselves be written into something beautiful and lasting and true. Florence Dawson had once believed she was done with dreams. But Porter Easton had shown her that the best dreams were the ones you built together, the ones you chose every single day, the ones written in sunsets and lived in the quiet moments of enduring love. And that, Florence thought as she stood in her husband's arms watching the stars emerge over the mountains of Victor, Colorado, was the greatest romance of all.